Okay, welcome everyone. I'll introduce you to your host, Leon Ward.
Hello everyone, that was almost perfectly timed. Apologies, I'm a bit pink. I've actually just finished a fitness at home class at 6:20. I had to run into the shower. That's why I'm absolutely pinging red at the moment. Thank you very much for joining us. We're in this evening for our third webinar now. For those of you that haven't been before, what we're currently doing is holding question answers with the ambassadors for the Young Trustees movement. But as we go forward, we want to be opening up the sort of people that participate in this to kind of sector thought leaders, to champions, to people who work in the charity sector but aren't necessarily trustees yet. So as we progress through the programme, that's what we will be doing. Historically, if you've been here before, we have said if you want to ask a question, pop it in the chat room, and you have the option of someone asking the question for you. That option is still there. So if you have a question that you want asking, please put in the chat, I have a question that I would like someone to ask for me. And then if you can privately message the Young Trustees movement name on here, which is Mita, she'll read that out for you. Otherwise, if you have a question that you're happy to ask, just say, I have a question in the chat, and then I'll bring you into the chat when I can. So without further ado, we will get started, and we're recording this as well. So if you want to share it with any of your colleagues, trustees or otherwise after, then please do. But it gives me the absolute pleasure to introduce Ellie, who is one of the ambassadors. She's the ambassador for London. And I'm going to ask Ellie, first of all, to kick us off by introducing themselves.
Hi, I'm Ellie. I'm 26. I'm a trustee for Quakers in Britain. I have been a trustee for about 18 months now, and in, I guess, like my real life, I'm a civil servant.
Ellie, first of all, because we're asking everyone this as a kick-off question, can you tell us how your trustee came about, how your trusteeship came about?
Yeah, of course. So I'm a Quaker, from Quakers in Britain, so we actually have a nominations process where names are considered, and your name gets considered before you even know your name is being considered. So I was actually approached and said that my name was being considered by the committee, and did I want to take up this role, at which point I sort of had a meeting with the clerk of trustees and decided it was the right thing for me and it felt good, and so my name went to yearly meeting, which is the national gathering of Quakers, and they accepted my name. That's where I was appointed. And then I had sort of about an 8-month lead-in time before I took up the role, which was quite nice in terms of just an induction process.
That's what I was about to ask. What did you do in those 8 months, and what did the induction sort of include?
So I think I was sent some documents which were really useful, classic articles, things like that, but also just met members of the team, met other trustees. I got the opportunity to shadow one of the trustee meetings before I joined the board, which I think helped with background. And I was also given a buddy for when I read the papers, when just, when you just need contextual information, you're like, where does this come from? And so that was really useful too, which was a very key part of my induction, and I'm incredibly grateful to my buddy for that.
Okay, and you've been a trustee for 18 months, as you just said. So notwithstanding the sort of 8-month induction period that you had where you got a buddy, which, by the way, for anyone watching, if you don't have a buddy, I 100% recommend you ask for one if you don't have one already. What other support have you needed to allow you to sort of kind of operate fully in the role?
So I think compared to how other people come to trusteeships, I hadn't sort of worked for the organisation that I was a trustee of. I think some people come to trusteeship having volunteered or worked in the organisation, and it feels like a natural migration. So I needed support in some ways in just understanding the structure. It's quite a big organisation in terms of workflows and how it's put together. It's got quite a complex governance structure because it's attached to the church as well. So there's church and charity that sits sort of side by side in the organisation. And understanding the nuances of that was quite complicated, which I think really, really helped get my head around. So coming into the role, I was much clearer on that. I think just naturally, I'm not a finance girl, had to learn that. Don't think I'm the only trustee who's ever said that. But also the other thing was reading my other trustees' biographies, seeing what their skill sets was, and that was, I think, probably the most reassuring step as well, of like working out what my place in this board might look like.
And I guess as well, like there's something really like a real quick win with just circulating trustee biographies, because I find if it's your first meeting and you can pinpoint a couple of faces in the room that you've read about, it just makes you feel so much more comfortable, even though you might not have ever met them. The fact that you know who they are and perhaps a little bit about their background, I find really helpful. How have you found asking for help? Because something that young trustees struggle with is having, and trustees of other ages too, but something that lots of people who wouldn't normally be trustees, they struggle with, is that sort of imposter syndrome around, should I be here? Do I have a right to be here? Am I the right fit for the room? And asking for help does put you out on a pedestal slightly. You're kind of putting your hands up saying, look, you know, I need a bit of support here. How have you found doing that?
I think I was really lucky. My trustee board set a recruitment target, and I was one of they wanted at least, I think it was 3 under 30s, but don't quote me to that. I feel like this is being recorded. I'll get pulled up for that. But they recruited 2 people under 25 in my round, and we were the first round of recruitment. So they'd set themselves a target, and they were really clear this is something they wanted. So actually the opportunities to ask for help was absolutely really positive. I think it's also a large organization, so there was also no expectation that I knew it all, which I think helped as well. I think sometimes if you join a small organization with a very, very clear direction, we have quite a number of workflows, and there was no expectation we know it all, but actually even now 18 months in, that responsibility is still split between the trustees. So although we don't have specific portfolios like some trustee boards, I know who might know more about something. So I still have to ask for help now. I think learning how to do that and working out when is the most useful time to ask for help was probably the biggest learning curve around, do I need to know that before I enter the room of a trustee meeting, so I need to send an email, or is it about actually in the room, that's totally a question I need to ask, because the whole room might need to hear that, and that's an accountability issue.
I think that's a really good point, because there's something around especially if you're one of the first young trustees an organisation has, is around like upward managing. How do you manage everyone else on the board to make sure they create an environment that's suitable for you to learn in and to thrive in? Now, you mentioned there different work streams. Is your board broken up into subcommittees?
So we do have quite a lot of subcommittees, and we do have property portfolio as well. So we have a finance team and a property and finance subgroup, and then we've got different departments, and they all have linked trustees to them. And then there's obviously standard subgroups of boards. So you have audit committees and things like that. And then you sort of have ad hoc working groups that the trustees require. So I'm involved in one of a simplifying governance working group, and looking at what that might look like for the charity. We're sort of in the process of testing that at the moment. So there's 2 of us, and we work with senior management on that. I have to admit, I really enjoy working on subcommittees. I think they're a really invaluable way of getting to know more detail about an organisation, and also in a slightly more informal capacity. So in the boardroom, you're trying to cover huge work. You need to get through an agenda, and some of that is what senior management feel that you need to hear, whereas in some groups you've got this flexibility where you do have an agenda, you have a theme of what you're all gathered, but actually if there's something that you need to ask, there's just a bit more scope to do that, and I think that's really useful.
Yeah, and I think like when I do training with chairs or chief executives, and they say, oh, you know, we want to get our trustees to really understand this key point or to win them over, and I think that's really starting on the back foot, because subcommittees are a real good chance to allow trustees to show off their skill set and to do a deep dive into subjects they might know nothing about, like you say. So there's something there about, rather than winning people over at a later stage, you can bring them on the process with you in a sort of task and finish group. And you said there about the learning that you've done, the networking that you've been able to do within your own board through a committee, but what other sort of skills do you think you have developed as a trustee, and how, other than of course being an ambassador for the movement, have you managed to showcase those skills?
So I think skills, one of the most interesting skills I think is it's totally different. It's a very specific type of project management, I think. I think I've worked in project management roles before where you've got a clear task, you need to get to this point, and you set a strategy and a plan to get to that task. But often in those kind of roles, you're quite responsible for the work as well. And so having one of the big skills I think I've had to learn is like what that distance looks like and the independence of the board and why that's really important to do. And I think that skill I've taken back into my work, because I now work in a space where there's so many different parts. I'm in the civil service, it's a big organisation, all feeding in, and we might all have a shared goal, but actually I'm only responsible for this much, but actually I still have to keep that accountability going. And so I think one of the things it's really taught me is what accountability looks like in different spaces and what my responsibility to that accountability is. Which I think links back into that project management skill. Like we will revisit things across a series of boards, and there may be a gap in the middle, but I haven't been involved in the delivery of it, but I'm still accountable for it.
Yeah, accountability is an interesting one because it's not one that I hear come up a lot in the sort of young trustee space. So let's push you a little bit on that. What, as a young trustee, or a trustee who happens to be young, who do you think when you're in the boardroom, I'm accountable to? Who is the bit, who do you fit in the gaps to? Who do you think you're acting on behalf of or in the best interests of?
So I think with that, some of that is dictated in your articles around like what you've dictated your mission values to be. So that should outline exactly to what extent you're accountable for what. And so in our articles, it talks about Quaker communities. And so that is who I'm ultimately accountable to. The systems, I think what varies from charity to charity is the systems by which you are held accountable. So some organisations have AGMs, and that's a really clear way of you are accountable to the AGM, which may or may not be membership or attendance based. And the way you present to them is then against how you should be held accountable, which is dictated in your governing documents. So I think understanding your governance structures really helps understand how you can be held accountable. And so for me, we have got a membership base, but we've also got a lot of attenders, but ultimately as Quaker communities.
You see, there'll be some people on watching this or who will be watching this back who have kind of graduated from a youth advisory panel per se, or the team of young campaigners or whatever, and they've kind of assumed the position of young trustees on the board. And I think that's a good way to get you into the boardroom, but there is a bit of a clash there around trustees can't represent the best interests of somebody or an individual constituency group. They have to act in the best interest of the charity. So, because that's what charity law says. So there is sometimes a clash between the route you've come up and the kind of constituency people you're supposed to represent. Have you come across that yet? Or do you anticipate you might come across that, where a decision you make might not actually be in the best interest of individual Quakers, but might be in the best interests of the charity?
I think we have a really strong sort of feedback loop through Quaker charities, Quaker communities, and there are, I do believe that for us, like if anything came to the board that we were really surprised by, I'd be worried about our communication skills. So I think, I'm sure there are challenging decisions, and absolutely I would expect nothing less than us to have to think about the difficult decisions that we do have to make. But actually I think the biggest part of that is consultation and making sure that you're taking people with you on that journey, and actually consulting people at an early enough point so that that decision making is transparent. And wherever possible, taking with you for people for as long as necessary to have that journey, so that the right decisions come out at the end and you're taking the right people with you.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, that's a bit like what I was saying about engaging trustees in subcommittees, that you can take the voices that might not naturally agree with you along with you if you engage them at an appropriate point or at the start point. Now, talking about board papers, because you said something about, you know, finance skills not being your bag. Finance skills not my bag either. I'm a bit better at it than I was years ago. But there's something here about board papers being critical to help trustees hold their staff to account. When it comes to board papers, we've chatted about this, and you said, actually, I'm okay with a long set of papers. Can you just tell me a little bit about your theory behind that? Why you not necessarily love, but you're really comfortable with a long set of papers?
So, yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't mind a long set of papers. I believe that if someone thinks that I need to read this, then I absolutely trust that they've done the testing of that process and they've put in front of me for a reason. I think I'm dyslexic. I'm quite happy to open that. I would much rather have 6 bullet points rather than a paragraph, but that's a personal taste, and I recognise I'm the one writing it. I think papers allow people to showcase what they've done, and so boards have to be willing to hear that and celebrate that where needed and appropriate. But I think also, for me, I trust that the team are submitting the papers at the length that that's needed for me to make the decision that I need to take. And so some of it's about, I've communicated with our senior management team if I'm like, could this not have been given to me in a graph, or and trusting that process and having that dialogue, that when they send me a paper which is 16 pages long, it needed to be 16 pages long because they needed to showcase that the risks and the opportunities are against that. So I don't mind, but that I think has come from building that positive relationship with the executive team, so I know what I'm receiving is what's required.
And I guess, you know, the title of this webinar is about what you get from being a trustee. And on the flip side of that, I guess one of the skills that I have learned over the years is around sometimes, and it's quite rare, but long papers can be there to pull the wool over your eyes as a trustee. I don't think I've ever necessarily experienced that myself, where a member of staff is trying to dupe me into taking a particular position on a paper. But I have heard where trustees just become sort of completely flabbergasted by a 30-page paper, and by the end of it they don't remember what they're deciding on and just sort of say yes or no or whatever it might be. So I guess there's a sort of forensic skill is what I'm getting at that potentially comes through this. Now, I think
it's also the balance between like having enough information that you can make strategic decisions without wading in on operational level insights. That is devolved for a reason.
Yeah, and that's what I was about to ask. So as a trustee, do you have any tips for those that are listening, how they can help staff balance writing papers with actually delivering? Because I guess one thing that staff feel, and I certainly feel this when writing reports for my board, is that I feel like I have to go into so much detail and kill them with detail because I want to show them we're doing a really good job. But actually it's for a trustee to say, no, hang on, we need just a few bullet points to give us the top line. Is there anything any insights you can share on that?
I tend, in fairness, I tend to write my own like executive summaries at the top of papers when I've read them. So I go in, each paper has a tiny summary of what it was, what things any questions I had to ask, any risks that I like cannot forget when I'm in there. So, I mean, if you have a team, if that feels appropriate, I'm sure you could ask for that. For me, that's a summarizing process. So I do that quite naturally when I read the papers. I think, like I said, if it can be shown in a diagram or a graph, please think about how you mix up how you present information, because I mean, think about the accessibility of what you're providing. 16 pages is great if the detail needs to be in there, but actually, do you have a board who have the time to read that many pages, but also is that the most accessible way of you presenting the information, and would it be better in a table or a graph or the like? I think sometimes it's people's natural habitat, particularly in the world of emails, is just to write a sentence. So it's testing that sometimes.
And have your board, so to flip the responsibility of accountability slightly, has your chair or any member of the staff team asked you about making papers more accessible for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had conversations with my chief exec. I mean, and I also was very clear with the board that quite often they all sit there with all of these papers in front of them in board meetings. And I had to be really honest in my first board meeting. And I almost did it as a disclaimer because I felt so awkward about it. Where I said, guys, I'm not going to have the papers in front of me. I know I'm not, because I'm going to have read them and I'll know it. I might have my notes of my little summaries, but I can't process this level of information again when I'm sitting in the board meeting. So just know, like, I've come prepared, and you're going to have to trust me that I know that I've come prepared. And all of them laughed and were like, no, we totally trust you. But I felt really uncomfortable about it. So I think some of it is about having that dialogue, but also being able to own that that's how I felt in that space. And it's been totally fine since, and they all know that's what I'm like now. But certainly we've had discussions, and I always think there's room for improvement, as I think there is in any organisation. Generally, my organisation is incredibly diversity inclusion aware, so it's very easy to have those discussions if you needed them.
Yeah, and I guess that's another skill you get from being a trustee, right? Learning how to have difficult conversations. It's something that I think for those of you that are at the start of your kind of executive paid career, sometimes you don't feel comfortable having difficult conversations because you're at the bottom of the rung in your organisation, if you like. Whereas at a trusteeship, it's weird because you're at the sort of the top of a very hierarchical structure, but putting yourself out there is something that's potentially even harder to do, but something you feel more comfortable doing. I'm going to ask Mita to come in because she has a question to ask on behalf of somebody.
Yes, so we had some questions in the chat about, could you share some around the accessibility of joining a board and considering you as a kind of youth when you felt ready to join the board and take on that responsibility, as the first question, and then as a second question, what opportunities have you had / what doors have opened for you as a result of being a trustee?
Okay, so the first one's around accessibility. Sorry, can we just do them at a time, Mita? Just memories. Sorry, Mita, can you repeat it? I lost it in the second question.
Yeah, of course. I said it in quite a confusing way. So it's around the accessibility of joining a board. So considering that you're a younger person, like the youth, like people would be like, oh, you're the youth. When did you personally feel ready to join the board and say, yes, I'm okay to go to that step, and take on all of that responsibility and accountability?
So I would say that I was really clear. I was asked to be a trustee, and I could have said yes a lot quicker. And I actually had a really interesting conversation with, like I mentioned right at the beginning, with the clerk of trustees. And I said, I'm really, really keen to take this on. But actually, I want it to be a really easy yes, because I want to be really clear about what I'm taking on. So I ended up having maybe two quite long conversations, and with another trustee as well, about what the role entailed and exactly what it was, and had any complications appeared in the last 5 years? Was there a history that I needed to be aware of? Because I don't think that would have changed my answer, but I wanted to go really, really informed. I think it was much easier, yes, because I went in very, very informed about what exactly I was saying yes to. And I'd really encourage people to do the same. When it comes to walking into the space on the first day, you just have this background knowledge, which I think is quite comforting. I felt ready. I had worked in a range of charities, both volunteering and working, of various sizes, with a range of portfolio sizes as well. And I was very interested in governance and had held allied to a governance roles before I said yes. So it felt like the right time in my voluntary career that I had built up enough understanding of the sector as well. I think right at the beginning of these webinars, Leon mentioned reading things like third sector media. That was something I was doing quite naturally already, just because of other roles, and I think that really helped feel much more comfortable taking that next step.
And the second question was, what opportunities or doors have you had opened to you because of your trusteeship?
I think it's the strategy part of being a trustee is actually a very unique skill to have in sort of a young professional, for want of a better way of capturing myself, and that is such a unique thing that young trusteeship has offered me, is this engagement with both short and long-term strategy that has changed the way I think. And it's both changed the way I think about my own career and what I've now looked for going forward when I look for opportunities more generally. I am very, as a personal reflection, I'm not a particularly goal-orientated person. I don't have a really clear sense of like, this is where I want to be in 10 years. But I think what this has really shown me is the positives that can come out of accepting an opportunity like this. And it's made me much more willing to go, oh yeah, no, I'll take that. Let's see what happens, and run with things and work with, and gave me an opportunity to work with the senior management team far above where my professional career would allow me to at this point.
Yeah, and I think as well that, like, I've gotten so much out of being a trustee. It's opened so many doors, but I guess, like, as a starter, it made me comfortable with dealing with Danes and Sirs and Lords and all the rest of it, because on the first board I was on, it was like her name was Dame Janet Paraskiva DBE, and I was like, you know, this 18-year-old lad that just moved from Grimsby or whatever. And also, there's something here about, and I do feel quite strongly about this, especially because there are some people in the charity sector that are pushing for a sort of financial contribution when you join a board. And that's an American model, right? Where in America, to join one of the big charities, you have to donate like $50,000 or something ridiculous like that, which is very American anyway, because they love naming things after themselves and all the rest of it. And I think that trusteeship is a very real way of giving at a time when I certainly back then was not able to give financially. So I think there's something there about, it gave me the opportunity to give in a way that I really enjoyed. Yes, I could have done normal volunteering, i.e. hands-on volunteering, but I wanted to be in a boardroom because I was a bit weird like that. Like, I wanted to be developing strategy and to be challenging people, etc. So I guess there's sort of those opportunities that it's given me, and the one to give I feel really powerful and strongly about. I'm going to ask Julia to come in, who has a question. Julia, I'll unmute you now. I'm trying to unmute you and it isn't working. Mita, can you try and... Oh, there we go.
Is it working?
It is, yes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for organising this. It's really great. I work at Youth-Led International Development Charity, and I've been a fundraiser for the past 3 years. And it's the first time that I'm attending one of these, so I don't know if it's been asked in the past. But I'm having a look at opportunities that are online, and it's not always that you find young trustee opportunities that are actually called for young trustees. So I'm wondering if it's a better tactic to apply for those that specifically say that they're for young trustees, or to go for any sort of trustee opportunity, specifically in my case that has a fundraising background, or to wait for those opportunities that are specifically for young trustees.
Great questions. Ellie?
So I think it depends on what you want to get from your trusteeship. I think if you're wanting for to go with a specific skill, and that's the skill you're quite clear you can offer a board, absolutely, I think apply for those sort of trusteeships which just are labelled trusteeships. The one thing I would suggest is often they've got a contact details for the person who's recruiting. It's often the chair or the clerk, and I suggest getting in touch and sort of scoping it out. I think like any job interview, I guess, it's as much about you working out whether you'd be happy in that environment as well as like them working out whether you're the best fit. And so that would definitely be my starting point, is approach people and send those emails when you see those opportunities arise. I think increasingly in the sector there is a mindfulness to increase diversity in boards, and so I wouldn't let that put you off. And I think in your application being clear about if there are limitations to your commitment because of having a full-time job, etc., just being clear, I think that's totally fine. I think most boards are shifting, and I think God forbid COVID's probably helped with that, because things like dialing into meetings now is the norm. So I actually am I'm really hopeful that this is going to get easier, but I hope that helps a little bit. Lots of trusteeships, even if they are interested in young trustees, are also only advertised as we encourage applications from, right at the bottom of job applications or role applications, and sorry. So in some ways, like you're reliant on them remembering to write that sentence. So I wouldn't let that put you off if you're interested. You might have experience as well, Leon.
Well, I would add to that, Julia. I would say that you are a fundraiser first and young second when you are applying to be on a board, because fundraisers are in short supply when it comes to trusteeship. You are in massive demand. So there's something here about flipping it on its head and seeing your youthfulness as an extra asset that you add to your skill set of being a fundraiser. I would also... That's really true. Go on. Yeah, and I think like we do have to remember what skills we're taking to the table, as well as the fact that you're a younger person, because you win the legitimacy argument then if you can say, look, I'm a fundraiser for this organisation, let me help you with that issue. I would say as well, in terms of expectation management, I do come across some potential young trustees who think they're probably, going to be on the board of UNICEF by next week. Clearly, for most of us, that is not going to happen. So there's something about scaling down your ambition ever so slightly for your first trusteeships, because smaller and medium organisations tend to be more open to diverse boards, diverse perspectives and backgrounds. And this might be unfair for some of the sort of top 100 charities, but they do and are naturally attracted to the sorts of Danes and Sirs of the world. And until you get to that stage, it is a bit harder, I think, to break those doors down. Having said that, you might be the only person knocking at the door at any one time, so it's still worth trying, but I think there is something about managing expectations there. We've got two other people who would like to ask a question. I'm going to ask them together, but I'll make a note of them should we need to repeat them. So is it Jana or Gina? I'm not sure how you pronounce your name, but your question, please. Just get you unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. It's Gina. But yeah, just like thanks to the young trustees for organising this, and thanks, Ellie. I feel like there's been a lot of insight. My question was, so I'm a newish director. My organisation's not a charity, and I was just interested in, when you first started as a trustee, were you comfortable using your voice? And if so, or if not, I mean, kind of how have you developed that confidence and asking sometimes just challenging questions? Just developing the confidence around that and like stepping into your own power, really. That's my question.
Thank you. And Josh, your question, please.
So firstly, thank you, Ellie and Leon, for sharing your experience and time. I'm an aspiring trustee. I'm the youngest governor at Great Ormond Street Hospital. Just coming back to the possible conflict between what's best for the organisation versus who you represent. Ellie, what in your work about simplifying governance, how's that sort of been applied here, and can that bridge the gap?
Ellie, do you want to take them backwards?
Yeah, I can do, actually. That makes sense. So what I think around sort of simplifying charity has been around how people offer their time. So we actually have, in Quakers, we've got a huge governance structure. It's potentially up to 500 people exist in our governance structure, which is actually about, I think, it's a huge percentage of the membership when you think around where people could be offering time and giving back to communities. We're wrapping them up in governance roles, and lots of them are on sort of 3-year terms in various governance roles. And so one of the things we've been looking at is, if we simplified the formal structures, could we find other ways of people offering their time where they feel that they're contributing to the overall work of the charity without being wrapped up in a 3-year term, which then allows more young people to participate, people who are thinking about having children, people who have children, because they might feel that like they can do a year while, I don't know, grandparents living closer, etc. But actually the charity might actually benefit from that more, because you get more people coming through, you get more ideas. Our diversity might improve because we would have different ways of people contributing. Try and think about whether we set up working groups for certain projects. So it's not necessary, it would be reducing the formal governance, but looking at other ways for people to engage, which actually overall might benefit, like I was saying, our membership group of Quaker communities more, and would allow people to do more local work as well, because if people are all wrapped up in central structures, their time is then not being able to be offered. And I think that's a really big thing to think about. I would encourage all trustees, anyone involved in any governance, not just at trustee level, is to think about sort of what you gain and what local communities lose, particularly at national charity level.
Great. Josh, do you want to come back?
No, great. Thank you so much, Ellie. That was really helpful. Thank you.
And the first question, but we're taking it in the order, so second, was Gina's, which was around, were you comfortable using your voice? If so, how did you get there? If not, how did you get there?
Yeah, I think I'm human, and so it ebbs and flows. There are some times I walk into the boardroom, and depending on where my well-being is at, the confidence I've had in reading the papers, whether there is something that I'm very conscious has just gone completely over my head and I could do with an additional briefing, if I've spoken to the right people before, will change how I enter the room. And I think that's indicative of any role. I absolutely can say that when I first started my role, definitely wasn't as confident with my voice. I'm really lucky that I've always been fairly shameless in the sense that I'm quite happy to ask questions, and I'm quite happy to say when I don't understand. And that is something that I have developed over the last sort of 5 to 7 years, and I certainly recognise that then walking into the trustee room, that made things a lot easier. I think, like we spoke a little bit about earlier, getting yourself onto a subgroup really helps. I will say I'm a director of our hospitality company, so I do appreciate the slight difference in that. We've got, as attached to our charity, we've got a hospitality company, so I'm a director in that as one of my subcommittees. And being in a smaller group of trustees where it's less formalised and less agenda led, because you just have a bit more space, really helped build my confidence. Because what I was getting was feedback. You get much more feedback in those spaces because it's a smaller discussion, so you hear what you're saying is correct. And so then when you go into the main board, I definitely felt more comfortable asking questions as well. And also, you'll get to know your charity, you'll get to understand the dynamics of it, you'll know where to push, you'll know where you need to ask questions more, because actually this is something that quite often gets a little bit neglected. And that confidence just comes with time. And I know that's not 100% useful, but I hope it's like reassuring as well. That's the reason most trusteeships are longer than a year. I recognise the student sector is a bit different. But that time on a board is not for nothing.
I think that's really good. Gina, do you have anything you want to say to come back on?
No, thank you.
Okay. I think as well, like, there's something here about, I think trustees who are young feel an obligation to be talking all the time and to be using your voice all of the time. And I have certainly learned, as I've gone through now the last 10 years as a trustee, is that actually sometimes the most powerful trustees are the ones that sit back and listen and ask one killer question or make one killer comment. But there is a sort of a natural sense of obligation to be talking all the time. And I think it's us on this call and others trying to prove that we're a legitimate voice, because we can ask questions about finance and we can ask questions about stuff that actually we're not really that interested in. It's not our patch per se. Would you agree with that or disagree with that, Ellie?
I definitely think that's true, but I think that also can be a characteristic of the board and how they interact with you as well. Because I think sometimes I've definitely had it where someone's gone, oh, social media, and then just looked at me and I've gone, hang about, I've seen you all on Facebook, I follow you all on Twitter. So granted, I probably tweet more than you and might understand the algorithm a bit more, but that's probably more to do with the fact that now I work in comms than anything to do with being young. So I think testing that and pushing back where you need to. So if you're also only ever being asked to talk on one when the question is around young people, testing that with your board is totally fine.
Yeah. And I think holding yourself accountable to that and saying things like, look, I'm not a finance person, but I'd love to be on the risk and finance committee, because then at least you can start to become one and start to learn a bit about it a bit more. Because I think trustees that understand the numbers are often the most powerful trustees, even if they're not qualified accountants, because you really do get to see and get your fingers under the skin of the whole thing. Now, I've got a final question for you before I pitch to everyone what next week's chat is, which is, if there was one subject area that you could have had training on before you joined your board, what would it be?
I think it would be around what a good independent board looks like. I think independence in a board changes based on your charity, so it's actually quite a nuanced concept, but that ability to test and hold your executive team to account whilst also being held accountable to whatever your membership or population looks like is really is something I really wish I understood more before I came to the board, and it's definitely something I've learned the most about since being on the board. I've seen, having worked in various parts of the charity sector with small boards, large boards, small charities, big charities, I've seen this in lots of ways. I've seen it done really well. I've seen more challenging examples of that. But understanding what that looks like in your organisation is something that I really feel like I've developed.
Yeah, I love that. So really good answer. So thank you very much for that. And thank you for spending the last 44 minutes with me as we've explored your journey as a trustee. And it's interesting because the topic was what do you get out of the boardroom, but actually there's a lot in there that ebbs and flows from that around what you contribute to the room, around the impact on your career, etc., etc. So thanks for bearing with us whilst we went on that journey. I
would say, just to summarise, I think what you get from being a trustee exists in a balance as what you give to being a trustee, and I'm constantly testing that, and I constantly sort of reevaluate that balance, and that's sort of when that's in a really good balance is when I feel most comfortable with my role, and I think that's so useful. I really wish I'd realised that about myself earlier. Because that's been a really good litmus test for me over the last 18 months.
That's really good advice, and a really good closing point, and actually does lead quite nicely onto the pitch for next week, which is how have young trustees been managing the coronavirus crisis in the boardroom? I'm interviewing Svetlana about that, and just to kind of elaborate on the pitch a bit more, I have found coronavirus a real playing field leveler, because no one knows about it. None of us knew what furlough was until about, I don't know, 6 weeks ago. So everyone around the boardroom, no matter how experienced they were as a trustee or even as a member of staff, has been learning on this. So if you are interested in that, come and find out more. Come and join us next week, same time, same place. And if you have any questions about that and you can't make the chat, or you want to submit questions beforehand, then please do. You'll see all of the advertising start rolling out for that in the next couple of days. But thank you very much for coming. And Ellie, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you for the last 45 minutes, and have a good evening.
Thanks, Liam.
Bye.